Well, it has been 5 years since January 6th that happened back in 2021. We're told it's the greatest act against the government since the Civil War. Don't know about that. We're now learning more and more about how our federal government was actually involved in the incitement of that riot. But while you were watching chaos at the Capitol, our guest was watching chaos in the chain of command. And that guest says DC National Guard was ready to move, senior generals stalled, and the people who were supposed to protect the Constitution were suddenly worried about optics. His first-hand account might change how you see that day. All that coming up on 1819 News, the podcast. We have an incredible culture here in the state of Alabama, but our politics and public policy don't reflect the people of Alabama. Media drives culture. Culture is what drives politics and public policy. Welcome, everyone, to 1819 News, the podcast. I'm Brian Dawson, CEO of 1819 News and host of this here podcast, where we are in pursuit of a free and flourishing Alabama every single week. This week, I have a friend coming in who has got probably the most decorated resume out of anyone I've ever met. And that resume includes the former Assistant Secretary of the Army, former Superintendent of Huntsville City Schools, 30 years of service in the Army, and retired as a colonel. And the day that we're recording this, today, it will publish the next day. But today, when we're recording, it is January 6th. And when you hear J6 or January 6th, instantly what comes to mind is what happened January 6th, however many years ago that was. It was a while back, but after the election of Joe Biden, while President Trump was still president and Biden was on his way in, there was January 6th. That's what it's been called. And the guest I'm bringing in, my friend Casey Wardynski, has deep insight into this subject because of the position that he held in the military, in the Pentagon. And so I'm going to bring him on to give details about that you've probably never heard before. But he's also, he was the superintendent of the Huntsville City School Systems, and we're going to spend some time talking about the education system in Alabama. So I think two really interesting topics with a very interesting person. So Casey Wardynski, thank you so much for taking the time to come down and join us.
Sure, Brian. Thanks for inviting me.
So I want to do your resume even a little bit more justice. I talked about former Assistant Secretary of the Army, former Superintendent of Huntsville City Schools, Lieutenant Colonel, and probably your highest honor, married to Karen.
That's right.
But there's some other things. I mean, you've done some really interesting, incredible things in your career. Every time we talk about something different that is as interesting as the last thing that I talked about. And my wife's favorite thing to talk to you about is sailing. But what are some of these other interesting things that you did while you were in the military and elsewhere?
Well, I was a regular civilian kid in high school up in Illinois, and I applied to West Point, got in, so I was a member of the class of 1980. That was the first class with women, so a transition period. Graduated in 1980 and was looking at what the options were, and there was a funny branch called Special Weapons. Mm-hmm. And I knew I didn't want to carry my weapon. I didn't want to be infantry, and I got tired of maintenance, so I didn't really want my weapon to carry me either. So I thought special might be a good choice, and that turned out to be nuclear weapons. Okay. And so I was in the nuclear weapons field initially. That brought me to Alabama. The Army's nuclear weapons school was at Redstone Arsenal in those days. And so I came here, and then I was off to Europe. Had tours in Europe, tour in Korea, several tours around the United States. And then got asked to come to teach at West Point. So they sent me off to Harvard to get a master's degree, economics. I went back and taught economics for 3 years, back to the field army, then a brigade S3 out at Fort Riley at the 1st Infantry. And then West Point called again and said, how would you like to come run the Office of Economic and Manpower Analysis? And I kind of laughed about that because I had told my wife who had lost to breast cancer, Sue, she asked me, what was that outfit? And I said, well, that's where they send people who can't teach. And now they're inviting me to come back and run this outfit that is apparently, in my judgment, people who can't teach. I got back to West Point, and this outfit had been created at the beginning of the Volunteer Army. The Volunteer Army had failed for 10 years. It was kept a secret. And then a fellow took over, General Max Thurman. General Thurman took over recruiting. He ultimately became commander of Southcom that handled Panama when we went into Panama under Operation Just Cause. And he was a real tough guy, very smart guy, and he believed in analytics. So he created an outfit up at West Point to compete with Rand Corporation. He liked competing analysis. So if two different groups create a similar set of recommendations, you're probably good. If they have different ones, you can ask them, like, why are they different, and tease out the important aspects. And so I'm a major, which is, lieutenant, captain, major. So I'm pretty young. And I get asked to run this outfit that's been run by colonels. And I go back up there, and they had kind of like the 3 tests of the Jedi Knight, and I passed those. And I became the director of the Office of Economic and Manpower Analysis. I was the 3rd director, and they're still there. They're still doing analysis, and they work for anybody with budget. So basically 4 stars, secretaries, those kind of folks. Primarily focused on budget and personnel, which are the same thing because people are very expensive. Recruiting was always in the big part of it. And I had done some unique things in the nuclear weapons field. I wrote the software that accounted for the U.S. nuclear weapons inventory, and they thought that was attractive too because this is a very data-intensive outfit. Mm-hmm. Ran that for 15 years. So I went from major to colonel in the same job. I think I'm the only guy to ever do that in Department of Defense. That's good because you can avoid the typical problem of the Pentagon, which is they outweight you.
Yeah.
The Pentagon knows what it wants to do, just like everybody in Washington that never leaves there. And when these visitors come in that are elected or come in from the field army and have ideas, they just outweight them.
Yeah.
Well, there is no outweighting somebody that's going to be in the same job for 15 years.
Yeah.
So I worked for 5 assistant secretaries of the Army, probably 5 or 6 secretaries of the Army, same number of chief personnel officers and chiefs of staffs and so forth. I knew General Petraeus. I knew General McChrystal. I did projects for them because they had budget. And I ended up coming back to Redstone a lot because I had a project that was pretty important during the war. It probably put about $1 billion through Redstone Arsenal. It was one of the many projects I had, and it was called the Army Game Project. It was America's Army, the official U.S. Army game, and it was created to support recruiting, and ultimately it supported psychological operations overseas, information operations, weapon systems development, training at Fort Rucker, and a whole bunch of other things, and had 22 million kids playing it by the time we were done. And we ran that out of Redstone. So I got very familiar with Huntsville, very familiar with Redstone during that part of my job. Retired in 2010, and so I was kind of in a lot of the business of supporting the war effort. People was the tough part. Nobody envisioned having a volunteer army that you could hold together through a 20-year war, and we did. Went over to Iraq in September. We took Iraq down in March of whatever it was, 2004. And everybody thought we were coming home. Most units were headed back to the port when we found out we weren't coming home. That the Iraqi army had been destroyed, but when we took their weapons and the police force weapons, those guys went home and found new weapons, and then they turned on us.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, there was no plan to govern that country, really. There was an outfit they called ORHA, Operations for Restoration and something or other in Iraq. That was going to be run by, I think, a 3-star general who was kind of going to retire. And ORHA turned into HaHa. It didn't work. Saddam had basically controlled his population with water and air conditioning, and we couldn't provide either. When we took out the police force and their army, there was no law enforcement, which is something we got to watch in Venezuela. And people pulled wiring out of buildings. They stripped the lines that carried power from the power stations to the villages. And so we couldn't provide power, so there's no air conditioning, which he used. And we couldn't get any water in either. Bottled water wouldn't get covered. And so the place quickly came unhinged. And I went over in August of 2004 with the Assistant Secretary of the Army at that time to figure out how do we keep a volunteer army together over here for maybe ever. And we came up with a whole lot of ideas, and they worked. And the Army pretty much held together except for the Officer Corps. The Officer Corps fell apart by 2007. And that led to a whole different set of projects, which ultimately led to the Army's new philosophy, I think, on people, which is called talent management. What you saw in Venezuela was talent management kinetically.
Yeah.
Before talent management in the Army wanted competency. We wanted competent level leaders. It was clear China was going to present a problem for the United States Army and the military in that they got too damn many people. There's an economy that's as big as ours. We'd never fought an economy that big. And the U.S. could always count on the U.S. economy to bail it out in a war.
Yeah.
When you put our allies together against Japan, Italy, and Germany in World War II, we were like 3-1 bigger than them economically. Same thing World War I. Now we got China problem. How do we beat them? Well, they don't do talent management. They do what they're told.
Yeah.
In our military, you can disagree and nobody's going to shoot you. They may send you home, they may yell at you, but they're not going to shoot you. Over there, people disappear routinely. And we have very talented people in this country, very good education system. So we came up with talent management as a way to beat China. And it would mean put the right person in the right job at the right time to do the right things with minimal guidance.
Yeah.
You saw that in Venezuela.
Yeah.
That's the premier application of that. The special operators were the first ones to adopt it, then the Corps of Engineers and so forth. When I became Assistant Secretary of the Army for President Trump in the first term, the job was to bring that home, finish it, because the Army was a little ambivalent. They kind of liked competent because it's easy to manage. And the idea that people actually have unique skills and attributes doesn't fit real well with like, you're all the same.
Yeah.
So we brought that home while I was Assistant Secretary. The way you get to be an Assistant Secretary is, Trump does not know you. I had a lot of friends, obviously, in the Pentagon who knew me for many, many years, and they wanted to bring this project home and finally make it the Army's new culture. So they put my name in front of Mr. McCarthy, who was the Undersecretary of the Army, and we got along well. But he wasn't secretary. They were looking for one, and they ultimately got one, Dr. Esper. He became Secretary of the Army, and I interviewed with him twice. And the period that went from was like September to March. March, he said, "You're my guy." My name went to the FBI and all that background check stuff. By June, it finally made it to the White House. And in June, the White House announces, we're going to nominate Wardynski for Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. That portfolio, you report to the Secretary. The Secretary of the Army commands the Army, not a general. Civilian control, he commands. The assistant secretaries all have portfolios. There's 5 of them. Mine was the biggest. It was people, training, mobilization, operations, medical, chaplains, law enforcement, and so forth. That's where I had spent most of my time working in this outfit at West Point when I was a major, lieutenant colonel. It took forever to get confirmed. So that was June. I was the last guy confirmed by that Congress. I had already accepted a job as CEO of a company in Texas. And my wife checked the email one last time, Karen, and it's an email between 2 people in the Pentagon, and I'm CC'd, and it says, "White smoke, we got Wardynski." So the Senate confirmed me and the last guy by unanimous consent. And that's how you find out you're an Assistant Secretary of the Army. You don't get an email. You find out as a CC on somebody else's email.
Yeah.
So then they want you right away. So that was like, I don't know, January 3rd or something like that, the last day of the Congress. If you don't get confirmed by that group, you have to start over. And I wasn't going to start over.
What year was this?
That was 2019, I think. 2019.
Times ahead.
Yeah.
2019.
Well, and these are kind of things I'm going to hit on. May seem a little extraneous, but that job had been vacant for 2 years. So there was no Assistant Secretary of the Army for the first 2 years of the Trump administration.
Wow.
This is a perpetual problem of the United States government. The people that never leave Washington, they're there to fill these vacancies whenever they come open. But the vacancies create an opportunity for the ones that never leave, whether they're in uniform or out, and they start grabbing stuff.
Yeah.
So an Assistant Secretary of the Army, I had showed you General Order Number 1, which tells the Pentagon, the Army, how it runs.
Yeah.
What is your job? It's listed. They'll go in there and start peeling off the best parts, right, and make it their job, which may not even be legal because these are called principal officials of the U.S. government. They're constitutional positions and important ones because they are the level at which civilian control is exercised over the military in this country. So, I don't know that. I'm going into a job. I've worked for people who've had this job, but being in it's a little different. I get sworn in by the administrative assistant of the United States Army. Esper was busy or something. And she's a problem to begin with. She never leaves. She's part of the deep state. So she's got her version of what my job is, and she's the one that just swore me in. Now, happily for me, I taught at West Point like 20 years earlier. And I can pick my people. I am in charge of people. So I pick my people, and they're my people. I taught them at West Point in various courses, and I trust them, and they trust me. Normally, the generals are very helpful, and they will get your people for you. So you're assistant secretary of the Army for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, and the acquisition generals have picked this wonderful set of people for you that are going to help you. Okay, they're not there to help you. Yeah. They're there to keep them apprised of what you're going to do next so they can get there before you do.
Yeah.
So my people were my people, and they were very good. They were all top flight Army officers. My deputy, I picked a special assistant, Mr. Lewis. He had been the deputy personnel officer of the Army. He knew Army personnel inside and out. This guy had been there forever. So he knew how the Pentagon ran. And the portfolio was anything human, to include Cyber Command, the Army's command post, funding it. The budget authority was astronomical, $98 billion, of which about $60 billion was payroll. So that kind of takes care of itself mathematically. If you got 20 sergeants, you pay 20 sergeants. Yeah. You add it up and you've got $60 billion. Healthcare and so forth. Typically Mondays, you met together with the Army staff and the Secretariat in the Grand Room up on the third floor of the Pentagon. These were like 30-person meetings. They weren't really meetings, they were like performances.
Yeah.
And the lead performer was General Milley. Dr. Esper was Secretary of the Army. The head of the table was me at Esper's right, Esper, Milley, and the Undersecretary at Milley's left, or the Vice Chief of Staff, and you'd cover various pieces of territory. It didn't take more than 2 or 3 of these meetings to see how things worked. Milley was a bombastic bully. Very engaging. I mean, he could tell a story like nobody's business.
No.
Very charismatic. But he was going to have it his way, and he wasn't going to bother with like staffing anything or checking with anybody. And Dr. Esper would articulate a few things he thought we ought to get done. And at the end of that, typically Milley would jump in with, all right, let me tell you what the Secretary of the Army just said. And that's not what the Secretary just said. It was Milley's version of it, right? And he would get away with that. And I would see Dr. Esper separately in various things. And I got a little more bold as it went, because this is his chief of staff. This is his military deputy. Yeah. Milley did not command the Army. Esper did, but it was hard to see that when you were in public.
Yeah.
Milley would come up with things out of nowhere. We're getting close to graduation at West Point, and there's discussion about branching. What branch of the Army would people go into? And out of nowhere, Milley goes, Mr. Secretary, I really think this year, when we commission the cadets that are going to graduate this year at West Point, all the women should go combat arms. I'm like, well, that's my portfolio. I own West Point. We've never discussed this. This is going to be a problem. And I listened to him rattle on for a few minutes, and I go, just a second, just to sort of peg expectations here. When those women went to West Point, it was illegal for them to be in combat arms, which is like infantry, armor, artillery, so forth. And now, months out, we're going to require they're all in combat arms? That might be a little bit of a shock to the system, don't you think?
Yeah.
Well, that meant no, it's not happening unless Esper overrides me, right? But that was routine with Milley. He would reach into any assistant secretary's portfolio and just dabble.
Yeah.
The budget is the biggest thing you do in the Department of the Army every year, because budget is policy. You can have all the strategies you want, but if you don't put money behind them, it's paper.
Real. Yep.
And the Army's budget, I controlled 60% of the Army's budget, and that was $98 billion. So I think the Army budget was about $170 billion. And putting that together over the year, things would start at the colonel level, go to the 1-star, 2-star, 3-star level, and they'd reach your level. And they'd brief you on why is this, the recommendation, and so forth. Well, what I noticed first thing was I'm the assistant secretary, and I've got almost no control over the budget because my budget will get done in 2 years. I'm working off a Democrat budget. Again, this is how Washington works, right? Yeah. So you put a president in, he brings his team, they have their policies, and trying to move the money around is like, forget it. So you want to do things differently. You got to wait 2 years. This is why having an 8-year president is kind of important.
Yeah.
Well, we get into it, and Milley starts again. Mr. Secretary, I really think we need a special pay for leadership in the Army. And I'm like, okay, that's my area again. We haven't talked. And I'm listening. And I go, General Milley, do we have a problem getting people to sign up to be leaders in the Army? I'm not aware of it. Well, Mr. Secretary, we've been at war for a long, long time, and our folks need a pay raise. And the Navy's got flight pay, sea pay, command pay, nuclear duty pay, subsurface pay. They got all these pays, and our guys just don't have access to that kind of money. And I'm like, well, General Milley, they faced that opportunity when they left high school or college, and they picked the Navy or they picked the Army. We must have offered something they wanted. Why do we have to offer what the Navy offers? Well, it's no money, and we really need a pay raise. And he was pretty up on like how much money people made. It was surprisingly for a general. I never met many generals that really knew that much about like how much everybody else made.
Yeah.
And I said, well, who's going to get this money? And he says, well, basically anybody that's leading, all the way down to like the crew leader on a 2-man team that fires a Stinger missile. And I'm like, okay, we're talking more than half of the Army.
Yeah.
So what kind of money, and I did the math in my head, and it came out to like $400 million a year forever. This adds up.
Yeah.
For a problem we didn't know we had. And I looked down the table and I said, okay, who at this table has $400 million to cull out of their budget for this item? And of course, nobody raised their hand, right? I was like, well, it's a no. But this is how Pentagon works. This is how Washington works. So when you hear guys like our Congressman Rogers talk about we need to go from 5 to 7% or whatever of GDP in defense, he had to really go to a few meetings over in the Pentagon and see how taxpayer money is spent, because I never met a taxpayer.
Yeah.
I met people who could spend money like nobody's business. Milley.
Yeah.
That was just one meeting, $400 million. Another meeting was the Milley gun, $400 million for a cannon that was supposed to shoot into China that physically is impossible to do. No. And then and they got a set of Germans of Joint Chiefs that talked about it, somewhere around that time frame. The biggest problem facing national security is the budget deficit, right?
Yeah.
Of course, the next group said it was global warming or some asinine thing like that. And here we are, never had a bigger defense budget ever. Right? And they don't include Veterans Affairs when they talk about defense. Well, Veterans Affairs is workers' comp for the military. If we didn't have a military, we wouldn't have veterans. And you add $300 billion of veterans comp in there, for Veterans Affairs, I mean. Now you're talking $1.3 billion, and now you add in the nuclear program from Department of Energy. It starts adding up. So this problem we have as a country economically, these guys are oblivious. It's just money. And Milley had no appreciation for money that the taxpayers sent. And I rarely found anybody in that building that did. It's very easy to spend.
And this is a great insight and window into the frustrations that we as a people have when we see someone like Donald Trump, who we know and we love and we trust, and you see him get in there, and then things don't move at the the rate of speed that we wish that they did. Wished it was a little bit more expeditious, and it isn't. And this is very helpful to figure out why. And that's the Army, and it's going on everywhere.
Writ large,
all throughout the government in Washington, D.C., this is exactly what's going on. So it's very disheartening and frustrating, and but it's nice to know that is what's going on and why. Right. So talk about, so you're in the Pentagon, Assistant Secretary of the Army, dealing with all these things. Talk about kind of the lead up to January 6th and what you saw that day and your theory of what happened. If you're running a ministry or you own a business, my guess is that you've been thinking about starting a podcast for a while now, but for various reasons, it hasn't happened yet. Send me an email. I need to personally connect you with Yonder Child Media. They built this studio in 2 days and tackle all of the production. I just come in, start talking, and leave. It's that easy. They do everything else. Whether you want to record at your business or a home office like they just built for me, you come in, start talking, and Yonder Child will do everything else. Send me an email. That's going to be Brian.Dawson, Dawson, at 1819news.com, and I'd be happy to personally connect you.
Senior leaders, not all, but many, 20 years of war is not a good thing.
I agree.
They did not hear no from the United States.
Yeah.
We found a way to say yes for whatever it was. And you saw how that ended up in Afghanistan, right? And I sat through plenty of meetings about, we can't leave Afghanistan. It's bad for the budget. I mean, that kind of crap goes on. We were talking about great power competition in China and what does the Army do to build up the Pacific and reorient from the Atlantic and so forth. And the chief of staff, who later I came to believe was a seditionist, Milley left. He became chairman of the Joint Chiefs. One of his handpicks became chief of staff of the Army. We're sitting there discussing the budget, and he goes, well, I'm less worried about, great power competition. I'm worried about great service competition. The Navy and the Air Force are coming to for our money. We've had the money during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're coming for it.
Wow.
And I'm like, I thought that was taxpayer money. If the best use is in the Navy, to build up the Navy, I'm good.
Yeah.
If the best use is to build up the Air Force because maybe their aircraft are getting a little old, I'm good, right? Very parochial, really disheartening.
Yeah.
That guy was a constant problem. And so the money part, you kind of see how it affects that. Now it comes to the civilian control of the military part.
Real quick, explain civilian control of the military.
We don't have generals running this country, at least as far as we know, right?
Yeah.
You go to Nicaragua, you go to Venezuela. I mean, these are military juntas by and large, right? It's the military's calling the shots.
Yeah.
That's not what the United States signed up for. George Washington warned against that when he left, right? He was commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He became president. They wanted to make him king. He's like, no. This is not what we set up for. That's why we fought this little revolution here.
Yeah.
We want civilians running this country. We want them to have control over the money. We want them to have control over who gets promoted in the military. Tuberville did a great job on that he caught a lot of hell over.
Yep.
And if you don't control these fundamentals, who's promoted, especially to general officer, if you don't control the money, which I would argue right now is not under control, there is no guy in the job I had to watch 61% of the Army's budget. He's up at the Department of Defense as acting comptroller. So they don't have an assistant secretary. Now we're going into year 2. They've rearranged the money, so the assistant secretaries don't have to worry about it. It's now run by the G8, an Army general, who works for the chief of staff, who was another one of the members of the military posse, as near as I can tell. Okay, in what degree do we have control of the military, right? And that becomes important. January 6th, I would tell you, was important. The lead up to that, of course, was the Floyd riots. One day everything's cool in America, and the next day we got riots everywhere. And it was awful in Washington. I mean, who would have thought, you could have scores of Secret Service agents hurt at the White House, and that's okay. And I would ride my bike every morning before going to the Pentagon over by National Airport up to the Washington Monument and back, and it was a great ride. And one morning I go over there, and there was one homeless guy who lived up under this underpass, friendly enough, never had a problem, come back, and there's like 6 brand new bikes, 6 brand new tents under there, and a bunch of smartasses. They're rioters that have flown in on some NGO's ticket, probably paid for by, USAID.
USAID, even better, yeah.
Right? And they've been flown in for the riots. And you're driving down the street and there's piles of bricks, like where the hell did they come from?
Forklifted in on pallets, yeah.
And so it was obvious something was coming, and then the Floyd riots started. And to my way of thinking, the Pentagon lost its mind. I mean, when I first got in that job, one of my guys gave me the Versities of Strength kind of thing. And he's a guy I'd known for 20 years. And I'm like, okay, well, explain that to me. I'm like, we wear the same uniform. That seems to not be an issue. That seems to, uniformity seems to be a strength.
Yeah.
And we believe the same things. We believe in the Constitution. We believe in our country. We salute the same flag, yada, yada, yada. And he said, well, no, sir, that's the doctrine here. Diversity is a strength. I'm like, I didn't argue.
Biggest crock.
But I'm like, okay,
ever.
This is like
Mind
not
virus.
great.
Yeah.
The riots come, and the Army bent over backwards. They were getting ready to do TV commercials. We did them for COVID, and you may have seen them. They talked about the Army's response to COVID, which I don't think any America cared about what we were doing because it didn't amount to a hell of a lot. We built hospitals nobody ever ended up in. Then they got to the riot, and it was like, hug a rioter kind of thing, and, video of hugging a rioter or something. And happily, our advertising agency just wouldn't sign up. They said, there's too much liability here. Yeah. We don't own these images. We don't own these people's sign-offs, right? Yeah. We can't do it, And that delayed it long enough for it to become like, okay, that was a dumb idea. But while that was going on, I mean, the White House is under attack, right? It was pretty serious. And you got people bad-mouthing the president for going over to St. John's Church to talk about this church that caught fire that these rioters attacked, right? And you got the stupid mayor talking about, how he had the park police run off the rioters out there in Lafayette Square, which he didn't, and on and on. And then Milley comes up and announces, I'm not on board, right? I would never have gone with the president over to St. John Church in uniform. The military's apolitical. Well, if there's anybody that's apolitical, it's not General Milley.
Yeah.
And he goes in this big mea culpa and goes on video with the military, say, he shouldn't have done it, he's sorry, blah, 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 right? Well, of course, that's a Rubicon probably with President Trump, right? And that was all pretty different. I've been in the Army my whole life. That was pretty different. And then comes this renaming the fort crap. And I'm like, thank God one disaster is not in my portfolio, right? And my deputy said, sir, it is your portfolio. I'm like, it's installations. How the hell can that be mine? I'm like, well, he goes, well, they're named after humans. And you got to be kidding me. Why don't we name them after flowers or something? But it's going to be my problem to rename these damn installations. And so, we made a call to General Petraeus to get his thoughts, which is what you do when you call the graybeards. Yeah. And thank God, Congress said, no, we're going to form a commission to do this dumb idea. And Fort Bragg, Fort Rucker, all this. And while I'm in with the chief of staff on this little fandango, he goes, I'm not obeying any illegal orders from the president, which is just something no Army officer could ever envisage their boss or anybody up the food chain. Now, he wasn't my boss, but I mean, he's the top guy in the Army, right? Just unbelievable. And a few days later, we start planning the graduation at West Point, which is a big deal because nobody had gone back to any of the service academies after spring break because of COVID. And now we're bringing all the cadets back to West Point, the seniors, to graduate them. And they had to get their cars and their stuff. They're going to the Army. So it had to happen anyway, but we're going to make it a big deal. And we're on our way up to West Point, and the same guy says to me, the cadets are going to mutiny today or riot or have a demonstration against the president. I can't remember his exact words, but it boiled down to the same thing, right? Like that, yeah. I'd been a cadet. He'd been a cadet. We went to West Point. That can't happen. Yeah. And I'm like, that can't be true. You're chief of staff of the Army.
How are you letting this happen?
How can that happen under your watch? That's a big problem.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem was he said it.
Yeah.
There's a problem here, right? So I'm not obeying illegal orders, which he meant by that, to my thinking, he didn't say it, but to my thinking was the Insurrection Act, which was being talked about in Seattle and all these places are going off the chain and Americans are being vandalized and murdered and cops are being, the police chief out in St. Louis was killed, the retired police guy out there. I mean, it's awful. And the Insurrection Act is a real thing. I mean, it's been used many times in the United States history, to begin with the Whiskey Rebellion under George Washington. And he's not going to obey illegal orders. You can picture what that looks like. Yeah. Okay. If you're going to have a problem with civilian control of the military, your problem's not coming from the Navy. It's not coming from the Air Force. Who do you always have a counter-coup force to deal with? Saddam Hussein had the Republican Guard, right? What were they really? They were the counter-coup force. Yeah. The Soviets had the same thing in Moscow. Hitler had the SS. You have a counter-coup force if you're kind of worried about that thing. Yeah. You're worried about your Army. Yeah. Now we got Army guys I'm worried about.
Seditious chief of staff.
Seditious chief of staff. Seditious language. Yeah. Milley, who has no regard for the president, and it's clear. Milley, who's a force unto himself, and now his underling here at the Army, who nobody's ever heard of. And I'm worried. Yeah. And we've got a Secretary of Army who's a decent guy, but youngish, and he's maneuvering to become a member of the Biden administration because he had worked for Robert Gates as Secretary of Defense, and Robert Gates went from the Bush administration to the Obama administration, so why not? Things got worse and worse in the Pentagon over the summer. President Trump was obviously struggling trying to get reelected with all the crap he had to put up with COVID and flying into airports and not being able to have, rallies and things like that. And it was a growing concern, about the election. And you heard the Democrats talking about it too, right? Trump's going to be a kook, he's going to have a military coup, he's going to do whatever. Yeah. Maybe a couple of weeks before the election, this guy says to me again, I'm not obeying illegal orders from the president. And I'm like, that's it. I went and got my lawyer, who was number 2 lawyer in the Pentagon, in the Army, real good guy, Mr. Lacey. He'd been an Army colonel too, and now he's a senior executive service. And I'm like, let's go somewhere quiet. And I go, I don't believe I'm even saying this. I can't imagine it. This is like a bad movie. But I have a real concern about our senior military leaders and the election. If it goes Trump's way or it's questionable and there's riots around the country, which I would guarantee you there probably will be, they'll be instigated, and the president decides to implement the Insurrection Act, the way that would work would be he would direct the chain of command as the combatant commander would get it. The Secretary of Defense would get it. Esper, no, he will resign. He won't do it because by that time Esper was known was going to be fired for stuff going on in Syria and other problems. Okay, then after him, it's going to go to the number 2 guy, Deputy Secretary of Defense. Probably not. He's probably not going to do it either. And after that, it's going to come to the Secretary of the Army, Mr. McCarthy. Good guy, but
Yeah. What would executing the Insurrection Act look like in that situation?
Well, that's why this flow.
Okay. No,
ultimately,
keep with your flow. Keep with it.
They end up with the combatant commander.
Okay.
Okay. The combatant commander for the Middle East is Central Command. Now it's called International Command. For the United States, it was Northern Command. And it's out in, I think, Colorado Springs is where their headquartered was. And the Army component of that was down in San Antonio. So they would turn to the combatant commander. The command commander, who would probably be an Air Force guy, would turn to the Army component and say, Army component, implement Insurrection Act. And the Army component, who was like a 3-star, would turn to the Army and say, I need forces. Release forces from Army Forces Command and other places around the United States, all these forts. Well, who's going to give them that order? The Chief of Staff of the Army and his padres, at operations and legal and all that. Okay, it's Mr. Mutiny.
Yeah.
Right? He'll say, the president's nuts, this is a coup, right? I'm not doing it. That's the illegal order.
And he's already said that he's not going to do it.
And he's already told me he's not going to do it twice.
Yeah.
That's my interpretation. Did he say it and write it down? No.
Yeah.
But that's my interpretation. And watching their behavior, I think it was reasonable. And then if you read the Time magazine story about how the Democrats plan to upset the apple cart after the election,
they just spelled it out
right there.
Yeah,
it's right there.
Nuts.
So, so I told my lawyer, I said, I have no confidence. I said, what are we going to do? I mean, it's going to go to defense. Who up there is going to do something? He said, they're pathetic. Nobody. I'm like, well, what's their legal team like? He says, not great. I said, well, is there any way this is going to end up with me? And I said, because if it does,
you'll pull the trigger.
We're allocating forces.
Yeah.
And I need to be prepared that day, and you're my lawyer, so start thinking.
Yeah.
That day comes. I fly home so I can vote. I'm from Huntsville, so I fly home, I vote at Huntsville, and I'm going to fly right back to the Pentagon. And my guys call from the Pentagon, and they go, sir, the continuity government office called, and they said, stay in Alabama. And I'm like, well, that's different.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I watched the election like you did, and I'm going to bed thinking like, okay. I wake up, and I'm like, what the hell happened? Right? What is this miracle that happened like, at 2 a.m. or something?
Yeah. Go to bed, guys.
Right. So the whole thing looked fishy as hell to me.
Yeah.
I go back to the Pentagon in a few days. And, of course, now the Trump people have no juice because the military guys, this loyal crowd, the illegal order bunch, they know we're leaving, right? And so we try to do some things to wrap things up. Palantir comes into the picture then, which is why I'm no fan of theirs. Mutiny, sort of within the contractor rank, comes up. The generals announce, and they're budgeting to close every Army data center and transfer all Army data to Microsoft, Azure, Amazon Web Services, and one other company.
Yeah.
And I'm watching like Truth Social get crushed because Twilio, that does the little garbage that says I'm a human, when you got to make a puzzle or whatever, won't work with them anymore. And it won't work with anybody that supports Trump anymore. And then, here's this other little thing over here where all the people's names get released to the public who were, donors to Trump, right? You saw all that happening, right, in real time. And I'm like, we're giving all the Army's data to private contractors. Amazon, who apparently hates Trump, right? Microsoft, who apparently put up a lot of money to get rid of Trump. Meta.
Oracle.
Right?
Yeah.
And you go down the list, and it's like one after another.
Yeah.
And even X in those days, which was Twitter, right? I'm like...
Pre-Elon.
Well, the Army network was in my budget authority, and I drafted a 2-page memo. I gave it to the White House Personnel Office, which is the liaison to the White House. Asked them to comment. They brought it back. They made a few changes. And it basically said, no money can be spent to transfer Army data out of Army hands to these corporations. Imagine what that would look like if we did that, and then a president said, I'm implementing the Insurrection Act, and the Army says, okay, mobilize the Alabama National Guard. And the contractor says, we lost that data. Or our people who work that data don't support that, and they're not coming in today. Which those things had happened elsewhere in the Department of Defense at some think tanks. We had a problem with one outfit, Deloitte, on a drone. Their people refused to work on it after we paid for it. Right? It's like, we can't have our data. We don't even know who's in the Army if they have our data.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, they went on and did that. Now all the Army's data and probably the entire defense, and the Palantir bunches are part of that. They got to have the data to do their magic, which I don't subscribe to. So that happened under the Democrats. I don't know how you get any of that back. But all this has happened to further and further distance the president and his legitimate, appointees who implement his policies that the Americans voted for. It's all becoming very loose and unconnected. All right. So January 6th comes next. We knew January 6th was going to be a problem. I mean, you'd have to be a genius. The inauguration is going to be a big thing. I think 140 Republicans were going to raise very serious questions about the voting, right? Yeah. And ask questions during the certification. And so in my portfolio, we had a thing called the D.C. National Guard. Alabama, the commander-in-chief of the Alabama Guard is the governor. Yeah. So hopefully very soon it'll be Governor Tuberville.
Yeah. Can't happen fast enough.
I have a lot of confidence that he'll do a good job. And in D.C., who's the governor? Well, there isn't one. They got a mayor who's not great. It's terrible. Yeah. Bowser, terrible. So it turns out the commander-in-chief of the D.C. Guard is the President of the United States. And it's kind of a last line of civilian control in my mind.
Yeah.
The National Capital Region, which is what the military calls Washington, is a very funny place. You won't find more military installations anywhere in America. I mean, probably 100,000 uniformed personnel in that area. It's the national capital.
Yeah.
It's the seat of the government. It is where the National Command Authority is. The National Command Authority is everything military. The D.C. Guard is under the president's direct control. The chain of command is president to commander D.C. Guard. And that time it was General Walker. General Walker had been a DEA, a counter-drug guy, a senior executive service. He was nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate to be commander of the D.C. Guard. And when that happened, he put on the Army officer uniform of a 2-star general, and he commanded D.C. Guard. So I'd been over there with him a couple times to make sure everything's good with the riots and then with this January 6th thing. Very capable gentleman. He ultimately became, I think, Sergeant at Arms of the House. And a friend of mine, Earl Matthews, was his lawyer. Earl should have been the Consul General of the Army, the chief Army civilian lawyer, but he had a problem with Esper. Esper, he told him you can't go to Cuba on vacation or something like that, and Esper didn't like that, so he didn't want Earl. Earl is now the Consul General of the Department of Defense. Good guy. So good people. January 6th rolls around. Things seem to be okay. I'm in my office like throwing stuff away because, we're leaving pretty quick.
Yeah. And
you leave at noon on Inauguration Day. My deputy, Gene Collins, came in. He was for mobilization of the National Guard. And he says, hey, something's going on at the Capitol. There's a video teleconference, secure video teleconference being put together by whoever. Can I use the secure video teleconference machine in the next office? I'm like, sure, go ahead. After he got it set up, I kind of wandered in there to see what was going on. I didn't envision anything like January 6th percolating. And on there is General Walker on his end, with his staff kind of very busy and, a lot going on. And he's at the Armory for the D.C. National Guard, which is by the old JFK Stadium, maybe 10 minutes from the Capitol. And on the Pentagon end was Mr. No Illegal Orders, the chief of staff.
Yeah.
The director of the Army staff, which, good guy. I got no problems with him, General Pyatt. And General Flynn, the brother of General Flynn.
The General Flynn. Yeah.
General Flynn was the guy that they went after first with Russiagate, right?
2016, yep.
His brother's the chief operating officer of the Army. He's the guy that gives the orders for Army to do stuff.
Yeah.
Decent guy, smart guy. And the guy doing most of the talking is the chief of staff. And the D.C. Guard commander, General Walker, is like, hey, the Capitol Police have called. They need help. We've got protocols for this. The D.C. Police will deputize our guys so they have law enforcement capacity, which is normally what happens in states. Governors, and the sheriffs deputize the Guard and they can do law enforcement.
Yeah.
We've got the quick reaction force ready. It's here at the Armory. They're ready to go. And I think this is like 2 o'clock-ish, something like that. I didn't look at my watch. I should have. And I'm watching it, and I'm like got a really bad feeling the minute I see who's on this call. Because remember, the chain of command is the president to the commander of the Guard. Now, presidents typically delegate. Trump had delegated to Secretary of Defense, who had subdelegated to Secretary of the Army, who command D.C. Guard, right? But all that can change in a moment. It can come right back to the president. And they're not there. The guys on the call are people that I'm really worried about. And they're asking for help. And now I'm listening to this BS I listened to the whole summer about optics. The Insurrection Act. We don't like the optics, right? These generals. We don't like the optics. It's like, well, you're not an optics guy. That's not your job.
Yeah.
This one, we don't like the optics of people wearing U.S. Army uniforms at the Capitol dealing with civilians and this fracas. And our best military advice is, they don't go. Okay, well, it's not military advice. This isn't military. I don't even know why you're here. This is political. The chain of command is purely political, people, which means policy, which means somebody got elected. None of you guys have anything to do with that. Well, they dilly-dallied around, and they're screwing around, and then the optics of, okay, Army guys at the Capitol, right? In a moment, I hear in the background at General Walker's side of the equation, the Virginia National Guard and the Maryland National Guard are coming. Well, when we asked for help during the riots, they didn't come. Okay, now they're coming? So I'm like, okay, this is the national capital. You don't just send state-level armies into the national capital.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is the seat of the national government. They wouldn't come before. This is a little sketchy. I'm like, where's the Secretary of Defense? I said, where's the Secretary of the Army? Well, he's left the building and nobody can reach him. He's with his security detail and we can't reach him. Well, he'd gone over to D.C. to meet with Bowser, the mayor, to do a press conference, maybe to become part of the Biden administration. Who knows? So he's not there. Well, that's great. And apparently he told them to go be on this call. And I'm like, where's the Secretary of Defense? Well, he's aware. Well, now we got a problem. Who is the Secretary of Defense? Remember, Esper got fired right after the election. He'd apparently been playing games with like how many troops were in Syria. They'd go meet with the president. President didn't want more than 600 there. There aren't. You go back to the Pentagon, you move people back in, right? And that kind of came out with a loud mouth at the State Department retired and told everybody what they were doing. This is the problem of civilian control again, right? Yep. Trump had sent a guy named Chris Miller over to be acting Secretary of Defense. Chris Miller was a former Army guy. I think he was running like the countering terrorism operation. I guess it was a presidential nomination, Senate confirmed kind of job. His chief of staff was Kash Patel. So supposedly they know what's going on. I don't know. Supposedly they do. And I know here Virginia and Maryland are coming, and we don't like the optics of Army guys being there. Well, it all says U.S. Army on it.
Yeah.
Why isn't the president's bunch over there? The National Guard from D.C. that's trained, very well trained, very well equipped for this, worked through it with the D.C. police and the Capitol Police. They know the issues, right? There's no optics. The Army's coming one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
Either under federal control or not. And it just disintegrated from there. Well, apparently there was a guy over in Army G3 working for General Flynn. They finally got the order late in the day, 3, 4 o'clock, to send the D.C. Guard. So they've been waiting. This guy, General Leneve, 1-star, apparently, he played a role in delaying the departure even further. He's now probably going to be Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. That's a problem.
Yeah.
January 6th unfolds. D.C. Guard doesn't show up. I was very disturbed by that whole thing. You can imagine.
Yeah.
I came home and I'm like, if Trump runs again, he's got to have a better bunch.
Yeah.
whether it's at defense, whether it's at FBI, wherever it is, and some of them got to be in Congress.
Yeah.
Right. So I ran for Congress. I didn't win. We got a spender up there now.
Yeah.
And, but you got to try.
Yeah.
But really an awful day for America. Subsequently, I got hooked up a little bit with some people, Loudermilk's office and Massey's office. They put me in touch with a fella, Steve Baker at the Blaze. And he wanted to talk to me about January 6th. Nobody ever interviewed me. I was a senior ranking civilian on the call.
Yeah.
They didn't want to know, right? I mean, you saw all the hearings, right?
Yeah.
What a farce. All right. Ultimately, things start coming undone. So Mr. Miller wrote a book about, being Secretary of Defense for, 60 days. And it's got like 6 pages dedicated to January 6th. And he's the hero.
That's what I would do if I was writing the book.
Yeah, it turns out, if you want to be the hero, you better write your own book.
Get your 60 days in that position, write a book, sell the crap out of it, make yourself the hero.
And basically it said, I had to get the whole bunch organized up there. The president told me, on like January 5th or 4th or 3rd, we need like 10,000 guys. This is a big deal, take care of it. And of course, the venue was controlled by the Park Police and the Department of Interior. So he discusses, Park Police is kind of like loosey-goosey, Metropolitan Police, not so great, right? I'm going to take care of it all. I'm going to organize it all. We're going to get it straight. That's the book. He gets questioned by Department of Defense Inspector General after the Democrats take over, under oath. His comments are, I knew Trump's proclivities to politicize the military. I saw all former Secretary of Defense had written a letter to that effect. I wasn't letting the military anywhere near January 6th.
Wow.
Now, who was his chief of staff?
The seditionist.
No.
No?
Cash Patel.
His chief. Okay, yeah, I got you. Yeah.
He came with Miller from countering terrorism when Miller became acting Sec Def, like right after the election in 2020. If you're chief of staff, do you know your boss?
Probably pretty well.
Pretty well.
Yeah.
Do you know what he's doing on January 6th? Yeah, you're there.
So. Yeah.
If, Napoleon had a saying to his marshals, march to the sound of the guns. Where were the guns on January 6th? At the Capitol.
Yeah.
Supposedly, right? At least in law enforcement hands. If I'm Secretary of Defense, what am I doing that day? Am I real busy? No, I'm cleaning my desk out too, right?
Yeah.
You don't leave your office. You don't check shit out. You don't go down to the Army and find if they actually sent the people, right, that you told them to send. Or do you keep the military as far away from January 6th as you can?
Yeah.
Now, you notice who isn't in government now? The acting Secretary of Defense, who was at the Heritage Foundation running Project 2025.
Yeah.
Right? So at least somebody read something somewhere.
Yeah.
January 6th isn't over. Those people are still around. They're still in the Army. They're still at defense. They're still no damn good.
Yeah.
And we don't know really what January 6th was about, but I have my own ideas. And I would tell you, I think the Army was already there, and that's why they didn't need the Guard. I think some folks in the Army were probably misled by General Milley and were there with the purpose of riling up that crowd using some Army technology called infrasound.
Is that the thing, the vibration things that...
the Havana syndrome?
Yeah.
I can't prove it, but I've now seen enough and I've heard enough that I think that's a logical explanation, and somebody needs to dig into it.
Can you give us your 30,000-foot theory?
I think it was they said Trump was a kook. He may do a coup on January, right around the election. They put that crap in Time magazine about what they were going to do about making sure he never became president. Mm-hmm. And they moved it to January 6th. And maybe the icing on the cake was we can create a situation where enough people get killed that we can get rid of the Second Amendment.
Wow.
Because you look at wherever they don't have Second Amendments.
Yeah, no, I mean...
Venezuela.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
Chavez took the guns.
Europe, yeah.
Right.
What about, and then I guess on the technology that you were talking about as far as being able to rowdy up crowds.
Well, Milley bragged about it. He was up at West Point after Trump got elected, but before he was inaugurated, and he talked about it. They had it at the riots in the summer of 2020.
Yeah.
And it's a technology. We can make you, defecate in your pants. We can make you have a heart attack. We can make you madder than hell. We can make you a lot of things with that technology. And it can be in a backpack or on a truck. a lot of these backpacks seem to be showing up in pictures of people in, law enforcement roles on January 6th. We have the ability in the military to be in the Army one day, out the next, in the FBI or in the CIA or in another organization, and back in the Army the next. We got very excellent people with a lot of talent who, if a chief of staff or chairman of Joint Chief of Staff tells them we got a problem at the Capitol and we need you over there, we're going to move you into the CIA or the FBI tomorrow. They're good young Americans. What are they going to do?
Yeah.
They're going to trust
do what they're told.
The orders of those appointed over them.
Yeah.
Can I prove any of it? No. Do I believe it? Yes.
Yeah.
It's
your theory.
Awful, and these people were capable of it.
Yeah. And what is the name of that kind of rolling unit? Because we were talking about that. It's like historically.
It's kind of like 20 names.
Yeah. What are some of those?
Task Force Titan Zeus, Task Force Orange, Army of Northern Virginia, Information Security Agency. The interesting part about that was Mr. Miller. He had been in that organization as a lieutenant colonel. Then he moved into the CIA as a lieutenant colonel. Now he's Assistant Secretary of Defense or Acting Secretary of Defense on a pretty important day.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah.
Right?
I think that is, everything you said is extremely interesting and eye-opening, but that piece, I think, is at the heart of everything that's going on with the intelligence controlling. So we're supposed to have a civilian-controlled government, and instead we have an intelligence-controlled government, it seems like. Well,
I told my friend Earl, he wrote a very excellent analysis of January 6th when he was working for the D.C. Guard, because the Army blamed the D.C. Guard and said, well, they're National Guard, they're just not ready, which was not true. He's now Counsel General, Department of Defense, really good guy, which gives me a lot of confidence in what he's doing. But I laid this out for him, and by way of doing a little fact-checking. And because I was in charge, notionally, of the personnel portfolio. When I was Assistant Secretary of the Army, I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
I know you can now as a civilian.
Yeah.
I worked for these guys for 15 years. I never heard of it. I asked my deputies who had been there forever, you ever heard of this? No, never heard of it. Turns out it's real.
Yeah.
Right? Intelligence. And he said, well, you sound like a conspiracy theorist. And I said, okay, well, just who shot Kennedy?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't Oswald at this point. And, at the end of that, Kennedy had said, I'm going to shatter the CIA, right? Yeah. Truman had said after Kennedy got shot, that wasn't what I meant when in the 1947, National Security Act created the CIA. It was supposed to be a think tank. It wasn't supposed to be a bunch of hired guns, And what happens when Trump's there? They're the problem of Russiagate. It comes out of there with Brennan and Clapper and that whole crew, gets over to the FBI, which is equally problematic. Who's in charge of that now?
Yeah.
I forget his name. Where was he on January 6th? Oh, he's over at the Pentagon, right? January 6th. How'd that go down? It's funny. And then, who ends up in charge of the CIA after when Trump gets rid of the guy that was over there at that time he couldn't trust? Gina Haspel, Deep State, CIA. For crime and any sake, can we get anybody that hasn't been in D.C. their entire life? Could we find anybody that knows anything about intelligence from Texas or Alabama or Florida?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the problem with that damn government. They never go away. They're all from D.C. It's a circus up there, the merry-go-round. You're waiting for your next turn to get one of these jobs. You're over in a think tank, or you're in some legal office, or you're in government, or you're at USAID, schlepping the money around.
Yeah.
And we need decent people from America. Thank God Trump has now picked this guy from Missouri to be the number 2 guy at FBI. He's a tough character. He's like Paxton from Texas.
Yeah.
But why would you pick anybody from Washington for any of this stuff?
Yeah.
Get rid of them and get Americans in there.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I was hoping to be able to dive into some of the education stuff. I might have to have you come back for that because we've hit kind of our time limit. This is all very interesting. Trying to think any follow-up questions. It was a pretty thorough explanation of, how we got into that situation and the building blocks of what created it, how it all happened.
Well, I got to make one thing here for a guy I support, Tuberville.
Yeah.
He caught hell from the Army. Everybody in the Army badmouthed him while he was holding up promotions of general officers.
Mm-hmm.
I totally supported him. I was on, the radio up in Huntsville supporting him. They would send 300 names over there from the Pentagon and expect the Senate to, en banc, confirm them all, right? you find out like there's some really bad guys in that list. Okay, how do we end up with like a surgeon general who's not a doctor in the biggest pandemic the country's ever faced, and the Army's a key player in like the Moderna vaccine, and where'd that come from? And the Army's a key player in like dealing with the COVID vaccine issues and the COVID pandemic, right? I mean, how does that happen? Tupperville wouldn't have signed on for that crap.
Yeah.
How does a Millie appear and pull the crap people, right? Tupperville's got good instincts. He's got instincts about people. And if you're leading stuff, picking people and putting the right people in the right job is job one. I got a lot of confidence in that guy.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And what he did, we gave him the first Albert Patterson Courage Award that's ever been given. We gave to Coach Tupperville for that exact reason. And I'm excited to see those instincts put in play in our state government on education, which we're going to have to talk about next time. Because, again, that's just one subject. You're going to end up being a regular, I think. This is just, I mean, unbelievably good stuff and stuff that I'm sure my audience has never heard before. So thank you for making the drive down from Huntsville and spending an hour with us, and really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
Awesome. All right, guys, that'll wrap it up for this week. And as always, until next time, put your trust in God and keep your powder dry.